Ready to commence, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, councillors, and welcome to this meeting of the Customer Focus Scrutiny Committee, which is being undertaken virtually in accordance with recently enacted government regulations during the current coronavirus pandemic. Before we start the meeting, can I please remind all members of the following? Please ensure that you mute your microphones when not speaking. Please remain focused on the topic being discussed. Please try to avoid repeating points which have already been made. Please avoid interrupting other councillors and respect the position of the chair. Please remember too that this meeting is still being broadcast in the normal way via Facebook Live. It is important therefore that members are aware that the public can hear what is being said and decided on, and that the public can see councillors as well. Please therefore take care to prevent any background distractions. Thank you very much. My name, for those who may be watching from home, it's Councillor Matt Vizard. I'm the chair of the Customer Focus Scrutiny Committee. Once again, welcome to members, welcome back to our scrutiny process, welcome to our officers as well, and to all those members of the public watching from home. Can I call now on Mark Devin to do a roll call of all councillors and officers to ascertain who is in attendance, please? Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Could councillors please state that you're present when I call your name, please? Councillor Vizard.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Michael Mitchell.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Jane Begley. Doesn't appear to be in. Councillor Owen Foggin.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Yolanda Henson.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Kevin Mitchell.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Trish Oliver.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Judy Patterson. No. Councillor Alice Martin.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Ian Quance.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Greg Sheldon.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Keith Sparks.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Wardle.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Steve Warwick. Thank you. We have two members not in attendance, Chair, but we are quorate to proceed. And if I may, can I just do a roll call of officers in attendance as well, and other members who are also here?
Please do.
We have Director Bindu Arjun.
Present.
Thank you. Corporate Manager of Democratic and Civic Support, John Street.
Present.
Thank you. We also have Democratic Services Officers, Howard Bassett, Sharon Sissons, and myself, Mark Devin, also in attendance. And at the moment, we also have Councillor Diana Moore, Councillor Emma Morse, Councillor Laura Wright, and Councillor Philip Bialik, also in attendance.
Yep.
Correct. Yeah.
We are, as I said, we are quorate to proceed, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mark. Welcome, everybody. I see everybody's resisted the urge to sit in their front gardens with the screen on. Well done. It's very, very hot and stifling in my room, so I appreciate it. It's not the easiest of evenings for this, but we will proceed on. The first item on the agenda is the apologies. Do we have any apologies, Howard?
No apologies, Chair.
No apologies received. Thank you very much. The next item of business is the minutes of the Customer Focus Scrutiny Committee held on the 6th of February 2020. Are members happy to approve these minutes as a correct record of the proceedings, please?
I would like to ask a question, Chair, please. Councillor Henson.
Okay, Councillor Henson, please do.
On the February 6th, item 8, where it comes over on the budget monitoring report, quarter 2, it's in the second paragraph, the investment on the on sites coming before this meeting. I know it's only a question, but has anything altered to the fact as the COVID-19 has altered any of the financial situation since we have agreed to the, well, agreed is you're just noting it, but the noted report, what I would like to do have a final answer on it. Has this altered in any way since this report was focused in February?
Well, I think we're coming off some of the questions about the HRA later on, which may help address some of those queries. And obviously, we were aware there is a forthcoming budget, which members will have sight of, which at this meeting it isn't appropriate to discuss because we've not yet had the opportunity to digest that. And this is also probably a question for Dave Hodgson and his team. And obviously, Dave isn't present here this evening. So what I suggest is if the answers are not forthcoming on that you need as this meeting goes on, when we come to Laura and Bindu in a little while, then perhaps these questions could be raised outside the meeting, and we'll ask Dave Hodgson to come back to you. Is that acceptable, Councillor Hanson?
It is. You talked about a executive, I presume executive, to talk about future funds of the city. When is that basically, is that in the media yet or not?
My understanding is not yet. John may be able to help, or someone may be able to help with the.
I can try and help if I can, Chair, if that's okay.
Please do. Thank you.
So members will have been invited, I believe, to a briefing on the 1st of July, which is, yeah, and that briefing is to make members aware of what the council's financial situation is post-COVID, if that helps.
Thank you, Bindu. That is most helpful.
Thank you, Bindu.
Chair, it may well also be worthwhile noting that the report that will be going to the executive on the 7th of July will be distributed to councillors on Monday of next week in accordance with the normal circulation deadlines. So that should help as well.
Indeed. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. So back to the question, our members, do we need to do a roll call on this? I think we do, don't we?
Yes, please, Chair.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind doing a roll call. Thank you, Mark.
So just for approval of the minutes, if you can just state if you're for or against when I call your name, please. So Councillor Begley, she hasn't arrived yet. Councillor Foggin, please.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Henson.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Sorry, I didn't unmute. Can I abstain? I wasn't present.
Oh, thank you. That's abstain. Councillor Kevin Mitchell.
For.
Councillor Michael Mitchell.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Oliver.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson, I don't believe she's here yet.
I've just received this at a moment her apologies via a text message. She's not feeling very well, so she's asked me to pass her apologies on.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Quant, please.
I'll abstain. I was not present.
Thank you. Councillor Sheldon.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Sparks.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Wardle.
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Warwick.
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Vizard.
For.
That's 10. That's 10 for and 2 abstentions. So the minutes have been approved.
These minutes are approved. Thank you very much, Mark. If I may just add one further comment, which is that on item 9 on the minutes, the scheduling of custom-focused scrutiny committee meetings, obviously due to the COVID and discussions at the last scrutiny programme board were solely about the scrutiny process and how we're going to go forward with that. So that has still to be discussed, but that will go to the next scrutiny programme board. So we'll come back on that question 9 that was raised. All right, the next item on the agenda is item 3. That's the declarations of interest. If any members have any disclosable pecuniary interests that relate to business on the agenda and have not already been included in the register of interests, they need to declare them before any discussion takes place on the item. The next item of business, item 4, which is the Local Government Access to Information Act 1985 for the exclusion of the press and public. There are no part 2 items on the agenda this evening. Item 5 is questions from the public understanding Order 19 on COVID-19 matters. That there have been none received, I believe, on that, so no questions from the public this evening. We would welcome those for the next meeting if members of the public would like to contribute questions. They'd be very, very welcome to do so. Item 6 on the agenda is the presentation on COVID-19 by portfolio holders and questions from members and answers on COVID-19. So, just as an introduction here, the Scrutiny Programme Board met on the 4th of June 2020 to consider the way forward on scrutiny and agreed that portfolio holders should report to each scrutiny committee on their respective issues in relation to the COVID pandemic. It was also agreed that members should be given the opportunity to put forward questions to the portfolio holders. The list of questions received from members has been circulated to all council members. For each portfolio, questions from members of this committee are listed first and then followed by questions from other council members. Councillor Emma Morse as portfolio holder for Supporting People and Councillor Laura Wright as portfolio holder for Council Housing Development and Services will present the respective briefing notes, with Bindu Arjun, Director, to advise as necessary. So I now ask Councillor Morse to briefly present the note relevant to her portfolio, which members will have had the opportunity to read. Councillor Morse.
Thank you. You've all had the opportunity to read this briefing note. I think it would be unkind to say that there were not a moment or a department in this council that did not have to react very quickly and very suddenly and very thoroughly to the COVID-19 pandemic. But you will see, looking at the housing needs and customer access, that the impact on those services has been significant. And whilst we are looking primarily at the actions that we have taken during this period, just to make it clear, the normal jobs carried on, that we didn't stop offering any of the services we previously offered, with the exception of closing the Customer Access Centre, which was open for emergency housing referrals. So I'd like to put on record that I am very grateful to all of the staff that have put in any effort, who have worked above and beyond, worked on bank holidays, worked in the evenings, worked at weekends in order to get these programmes into place, to get grants available for the people who most need it, and to make sure that the most vulnerable in our society were looked after. There is another little bit to my portfolio which doesn't have a briefing in at the moment, but I think some credit, there are questions on it later, but there's some credit needs to go to those as well. Meanwhile, environmental health have been looking at all the same things they used to look at and more. So some credit should be to them that there have still been HMO licensing works going on, by, not by physically entering buildings until much more recently, just because I don't think they've got the credit that they should have for that work, as well as all the public health work that they've had to be doing in just their day-to-day job. So open to questions.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. I'm sure the members of this committee would very much echo your thanks and huge gratitude for the immense amount of work that all of the officers and their teams under your portfolio have contributed over the previous few months and the coming months as well. Questions from members of the committee received are from Councillor Kevin Mitchell and Councillor Michael Mitchell, with questions from non-committee members, Councillor Diana Moore and Councillor Jemima Moore. Members are invited to read out their questions in the order set out in the list, which I think is on your screens, and the portfolio holder and or the director will respond. The member who has put the question may ask a supplementary based on the response given, and I will prompt councillors on that. Committee members who wish to raise a point of clarification after the response of the portfolio holder director to each question and any supplementary question, please indicate verbally or via chat if you wish to speak, and I'll bring you in the order that we receive those. And this process will be repeated for each of the questions. So I hope that's clear. I'm sure it will become clear if it isn't already. So let's kick off, and we'll go to Councillor Kevin Mitchell. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is, in January, Exeter received an allocation of £917,850 for 2021 from the Rough Sleeping Initiative allocations. Please can you confirm if Exeter will still receive that amount in this financial year? Thank you.
Yes, is the quick answer. The Senior Advisory of the Homelessness Advisory Support Advisor of the Homelessness Advisory Support Team, or HAST, which is a lot easier to say, from MHL, has stated that there is no intention to withdraw funding. HAST has agreed our plans for ensuring the 3 of the 10 project strands that were delayed as a result of the COVID now being processed without any financial clawback. This includes one that may be repurposed, but the money is recycled into one of the RSI projects, probably the night shelter.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Councillor Mitchell, do you have a supplementary, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Morse. May I ask whether any additional initiatives are now planned due to the COVID-19 outbreak?
Councillor Morse.
But I don't want to steal other Councillor Mitchell's thunder because he's got a question coming up about some of that. So I don't know whether you prefer to listen to that and maybe come in later. Also, we became aware yesterday that we're going to be given extra funding to keep people housed. I don't know how much that is or how that's going to work. So Bindu may wish to give us some of that information. I think we probably don't have it yet, but she may have a bit more information on that.
You're absolutely right, Councillor. Yep, sorry, Chair. Through you, we don't have any information yet. We continue to speak on a very regular basis to our colleagues in HAST to make sure that obviously we're availing ourselves of any opportunity to get additional funding, both from the funds that were announced yesterday as well as previous funds that have been announced. So yeah, we'll keep in close dialogue, but no detail yet. We're happy to circulate that as soon as it's known.
Thank you, Bindu. I'm happy to invite any questions of clarification from members of the committee or follow on.
I'd like to ask a question, Chair. Councillor Henson.
Over to you.
Is this money ring-fenced, particular money ring-fenced at all?
I imagine it is, but I'm going to ask Bindu Arjun again. She's nodding her head. Yes, it will be ring-fenced for the for accommodation.
Thank you. Thank you.
So both the existing RSI funds. Sorry, Councillor Henson, I'm not sure if you're talking about the RSI funds we already have or the ones we hope to get, but both of those will absolutely be ring-fenced for the purposes of preventing homelessness.
I was going to ask both. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to raise a point of clarification, please? Don't see anybody having indicated. Okay. All right. We'll move on to the second question. Thank you very much. Question 2 is again, Councillor Mitchell. Over to you, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. Thank you again, Chair. Has any multi-agency planning occurred to develop a recovery strategy so that those currently staying in emergency accommodation are not faced with a return to the streets when the immediate risk from the first wave of this virus recedes?
Councillor Morse.
Yes, housing lead managers lead on the first multi-agency responses to COVID, setting up partner meetings and daily information reporting process. This was then built into a governance structure based on the groundswell planning model and lead passed to the Exeter Homelessness Partnership Coordinator. Weekly meetings and feedback loops on lead areas of the model have been in place since April, involving a range of homelessness sector partners plus public health, various Devon County Council commissioners, local businesses and people with lived experience. Exeter City Council leads on accommodation and step down plans and has set up a system for tracking and reviewing all individuals in emergency accommodation, recording critical needs including health and shielding and other primary and secondary care information. This information is shared with partner agencies involved in the delivery of care and support to clients and the planning for transitions of key support services for successful move on. Housing services have cited the planning pro forma and initial assessment of accommodation and support needs, and are attending a series of co-design meetings in the next 2 weeks to assess feasibility for a bid to capital and revenue funds to be immediately released by homes.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kevin Mitchell, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you again, Councillor Morse. Several residents have contacted me because they're concerned that there's been an increase in the number of individuals seen rough sleeping, particularly in the city centre. So taking into account your answer to the question then, can you tell us exactly what initiatives are occurring to try and resolve the immediate issues that are on the streets at present, and will you work with other members so we can resolve this together?
I'm happy to have conversation with other members, but you know, as the lead portfolio holder, the buck stops with me and the decisions stop with me. So I'm happy to have all the conversations in the world, and you get to scrutinise those decisions I make. But that, you know, I am at the top of the tree, and believe me, I get enough grief for it as well. At the moment, we have the same things in place that we had before. The offer went out to all rough sleepers in the city at the beginning of the Bring Everyone In initiative. We offered those positions. Not everybody wanted to come in, and not everybody has been able to sustain remaining inside. It doesn't mean that our outreach workers and other other efforts aren't being made with them, and will continue to be made with them. But I think, Kevin, you and I have been on this council for long enough having these conversations to know it's a far more complex issue than just offering a home. But we do offer the home, and we have tried, and we will continue to offer that support that's needed.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. I will open it up to any supplementary questions of clarification or follow on from members of the committee.
I would like to ask a question, Chairman. It's Councillor Henson.
Councillor Henson, yes, you're the first again, so over to you.
I would like to ask, though there is, and I understand Councillor Morse's difficulty, is not everybody wants to stay in, and that's always been the way, and we're not in the business to keep people in. But the point is, how have we kept people from entering Exeter? Has this been a problem, or did we accept them from further afield when we're supposed to be in lockdown?
I might need some support on the technicalities of this answer, but essentially, you know, we had to bring everybody in. It didn't mean that we suddenly opened our doors to people that may come from other areas of the country. And I'm going to let Bindu explain how we manage that, because I know I'll say the wrong thing and it won't be quite.
Bindu.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Through you, Chair. So Councillor Morse is right. So if people present in Exeter and they don't have a local connection to Exeter, but they have a local connection clearly to somewhere else, we would work with those local authorities to try and resolve that issue for the individual so that they can return to the place where they do have a local connection, if it's safe for them to do so. Now, clearly, if we're in situations where someone has experienced and certainly claims to be experiencing domestic violence, or they feel that they're at harm in the place that they travel to Exeter from, we will work where we can with local agencies to validate that information, provide the appropriate support. But we obviously can't stop anyone from coming into Exeter, but we try and ensure that where there isn't a local connection, we will work to support that person to return to the place where they do have a local connection. And that's absolutely within line with legislation. And when we've had conversations with HAST in terms of, is there an expectation that we would relax the normal legislation we work to when we're working to support people who are rough sleeping, they've been clear and said that isn't the expectation. We need to work, as we always do, to try and resolve problems where we can, but we haven't torn up legislation, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate both the Bindu as well as the Councillor explaining. Have we got any figures? I wouldn't want to see them forced back or any, but the question has been raised to myself and David. If indeed, you know, has people been come down, not because it's a nice area, it's just because of need. Have we got any numbers on that at all or not?
I think Councillor Morse wanted to come back in briefly.
I wanted to come back on two things. I'm sure we can get figures for you, but I don't think Bindu or I would be able to pull them off the top of our heads, and it's probably best that we didn't actually.
That's all right. Thanks. Thanks very much, Councillor.
The other point that I wanted to make is it's really important, and Bindu has edged around this and sort of mentioned it as well. Our staff are really well trained, really committed people, and they spend a lot of time getting to know the people that they work with. And if anyone's ever at risk or there's a reason we shouldn't send them back to where they're from, you know, that is one of the considerations. So I just want to make that clear, because I think there's this idea that we sort of push everybody, give everyone a train ticket and wave goodbye. There's a lot more work happens and reconnection goes into place. But also statistically, in those situations where people don't have problems with their family, they are more likely to go into accommodation and remain in it and sort of have the recovery that's necessary if they've got those support systems. So it's quite easy to, I think, from one point of view, to say, why do we let all these people in? But also that people want to know why we want people to leave as well. And it isn't just about the funding, although that has something to do with it, and the government guidance. It's also about getting the best result for the person, because nobody chooses to be homeless.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, you seem to have frozen, Councillor Morse. I don't know whether you'd finished. Frozen on my screen. Okay, well, what we'll do, Councillor Henson, is we'll ask how to make a note of that.
I'd like a question.
We'll come back to you with the response on the figures, and perhaps to all the members of the committee as well. I had Councillor Sheldon next, please.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Chair. Portfolio holder, do you share my concern when the Minister responsible for housing wrote to us at the beginning of this month to suggest that the people we were putting in the Great Western Hotel, who were street attached, should be encouraged to ask to stay with families and friends when they're released, not least because it's actually breaching the government's own COVID restrictions? And do you share my concern that the government announces, oh, you're getting extra money at a press conference, and you would expect the email with the details to go to local authorities more or less at the same time? And here we are more than 24 hours later, and in answer to the question, what are the details of the scheme, you and the officer are having to say, we don't know yet.
Councillor Morse?
On the first question, I kind of referred back to the previous answer I gave. First of all, that if there's a way to connect someone, they're going to respond better, but it's not often that easy or that simple that you could do it overnight. But I think the complexities of why people are homeless are the reason they're homeless, and it's not as simple as putting somebody back in a home and with their family and everything's going to be okay. So I don't think that was particularly helpful. And I also think, you know, some of the risks for disease control would have been matters that needed to be discussed with that. In answer to the question about government guidance, I think in an ideal world, and because I'm a political animal, yes, we should get the guidance at the same time. I am a school governor, so I'm aware of how many sets of guidance you can get if you're really lucky in a week to sort of keep you up to date with current plans. But if I'm being generous, I would say this is an evolving situation, but you probably should have a better idea of what you're going to do, because actually I can't remember the figure, but I sort of looked at it and thought by the time you split it across several local authorities and several homeless people, it's not a massive figure. So I think we'll have to see how the maths works out, and whether there are some areas that have a bigger problem, get more money. We'll just have to wait and see. At the moment, I know the officers before this announcement were looking at how we solve this anyway. So hopefully with being creatively, and if we're very lucky, we'll get a bit more money, and that can help us be more creative.
Thank you. Any more questions from members of the committee? Follow-on questions?
I'd like to ask a question.
Councillor Foggin.
Emma, you said you would be finding people by tracking and reviewing. How is the tracking going to be done?
Hopefully more successfully than the government.
I hope so.
I think until you spend a lot of time talking to the officers within the housing needs team and with the police that are involved with the housing needs team and the support services that are involved with the housing needs team, you don't fully understand how well those groups of people know the homeless community of Exeter, and how quickly that community talks and lets us know if somebody else turns up, or how the people of Exeter let us know. So when it sounds like tracking and sort of tracing, it sounds far more, I suppose, almost sinister than the way that we currently do it. And it's just about having good relationships and knowing where people are, making sure that we know what their needs and their problems are. You know, it's not like tracing an illness across the country.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions for under this one to follow up? I've got no one else has indicated. Last opportunity. Okay, we will move on. Thank you to question 3, which is a joint question, which we've put together. We've amalgamated 2 questions which were very similar from Councillors Kevin and Michael Mitchell. I understand Councillor Michael Mitchell is going to ask this one. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Has the City Council issued any guidance to private sector HMO landlords during the COVID lockdown, and what financial and other support linked to the present crisis has been allocated to supporting private sector landlords, HMO properties and purpose-built student accommodation?
Councillor Morse.
Thanks. Oh, am I back in the room yet? Landlords were sent information referring them to government guidelines as part of the regular electronic newsletter on the 3rd of May 2020. We are not aware of any specific government COVID-19 funding for private sector landlords, HMO properties or purpose-built student accommodation. No financial support has been provided to private sector landlords, HMO properties or purpose-built student accommodation by Exeter City Council.
Thank you. Councillor Michael Mitchell, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The question also asked about guidance issued by the City Council. In regard to any future guidance, should the people of Exeter look to that guidance coming from the City Council and that to be the guidance that they follow? Because currently people are getting a range of guidance from a range of different bodies, and I'm concerned that they look to the police to be the final arbiter, but the police are there to enforce the guidance, not to write the guidance.
Councillor Morse.
I think you're doing a discredit to our private sector team, who, just for a few stats this year, as far as HMO licensing goes, have 1,250 current mandatory HMO licenses. 106 have been added as an additional checks because they didn't have the correct fire services in them. Property checks have been looked at on 652 properties so far this year because to see if they needed a license. 325 HMO license inspections have taken place. 35 notice and schedules were issued because people were not living up to the HMO guidance that they should. They've had 265 service requests relating to private sector housing, and they've dealt with them. And they've led 2 renting minefield events up at the university with a capacity of 200. And I attended one of them and it was pretty incredible, I have to say, which involved all sorts of roadshows and assistance, but also bringing in experts to explain how they need to be good landlords. It's not our job on that level to provide guidance to the private sector landlords the way you seem to think it is. But what is our job means that we do have these roadshows. We have regular meetings with those who want to engage with us, and we do take action against people. So we might not be about to write any guidance about COVID-19 because there's not anything really that private sector landlords currently can do, because I think Councillor Sparks is probably, Councillor Mitchell is probably aware, at the moment there is nothing a landlord can do with his tenants because for the next couple of months there are no evictions or threat of eviction allowed to be made.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. I'm happy to open this up to any supplementary or follow-on questions, points of clarification to other members of the committee. Can't see anybody indicating.
Sorry, Councillor Kevin Mitchell's Chair.
Councillor Kevin Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again, Councillor Morse, for your answer to our joint question that was put in. I very much understand that you have the roadshows with private sector landlords, and obviously that is very beneficial and very helpful. However, there have been issues during the COVID lockdown with some poorly managed properties. Therefore, would you be willing to look at having a roadshow prior to the reopening of the university later this year, so that lessons can be learnt and good practice can also be reinforced to bad landlords from good landlords.
That does rather link into question 4, but go ahead, Councillor.
Yeah, it sort of does. The funding for the roadshows came from a one-off government grant, and there isn't anything within my budget to do something on that level. I also probably would err away from getting that many people together in a large room at the moment, and things will change as we move forward. But I think there is probably a conversation to be had with those officers about how we do communicate leading back to that time. But I think I have to reiterate at the moment that I know there are circumstances within Exeter at the moment which none of us would want to have to live through, and I'm not in any way belittling that. But there is an issue with what the City Council have got the powers to do, and as much as I can understand people hope that with our HMO licensing we are able to take action to solve that problem at the moment, we do not have the power to do it, whether it be with public health laws or the HMO licensing, because the HMO licensing is about good landlords, not about punishing landlords because they have bad tenants at a time they can't take action against their tenants. And I think what we have to understand is government have issued a lot of guidance with the best of intentions, and I'm being very broad-minded as I use that sentence. I might not agree with it all, but with the best of intentions, and there are always going to be unintended circumstances as a result of that. And I think at the moment that's the situation we're finding ourselves in small pockets of Exeter, and that's something that the government really and the university need to address.
Thank you, Councillor Musk. Any other questions before we move on to the next one? I don't have anyone else indicating. Okay, right, we'll move on then to question 4, and that's Councillor Kevin Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. My 4th question, has the City Council had any meetings with the University of Exeter to discuss the safe movements of its students to and from private sector HMOs within communities during the COVID lockdown?
Councillor Morse.
Again. Yes, we regularly meet with the university in a variety of multi-agency fora as part of business as usual. In addition, there has been additional joint work as a result of the pandemic. The emergency planning structure established through local resilience fora has been in operation and continues to be. Therefore, council officers have been involved in weekly operational meetings throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, of which the university have been an invitee. These meetings form part of the emergency response system and are chaired by senior officers from Devon and Cornwall Police. There are strategic and tactical meetings, and the issue of student movement has been noted on the strategic command group, with the local operational tactic group having been detailed multi-agency discussions with the university.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Do you have a supplementary question, Councillor Kevin Mitchell?
Thank you, Chair. Again, thank you, Councillor Morse, for the update. May I ask whether in the future local members could be updated of the meetings that do occur? I don't want verbatim of what occurred, but just sort of a summary, because obviously we are the front face of the council towards local communities. And I very much appreciate the hard work that has occurred by council officers and the police, as is the community as well. They appreciate that. But it would be helpful if we were briefed more regularly, if at all possible.
I don't go to those meetings, I don't attend them, and I don't pretend to have the knowledge that probably would make me useful in them, but I will talk to the officers and see what I can find out for you, okay?
Okay, thank you very much. I'll open it up to members of the committee for follow-on questions or points of clarification, please. Not seeing anybody indicating. Okay. Right, okay, we will move straight on. And that's Councillor Kevin Mitchell again. Question 5, please, Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. This is a revolving theme, I'm afraid. My 5th question, is the portfolio holder / senior officer aware of the concerns expressed by the Exeter St James Forum regarding concerns about private HMOs during the COVID lockdown?
Councillor Morse.
Yes, I can confirm that both I and the senior officers are aware of these concerns. Environmental health and community safety, the officers for environmental health and community safety, sorry. They continue to investigate noise nuisance complaints when they are reported to the service in line with normal practice and procedure. It should be noted that the Council does not have any enforcement powers with respect to Regulation 6, restrictions of movement, or Regulation 7, restrictions of gatherings, of the Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions England Regulations 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Councillor Kevin Mitchell, do you have any supplementary question?
Thank you once again. Just a very quick supplementary. Would you be willing to have a virtual meeting with the St James Forum so that they could discuss their concerns?
I am more than happy to listen to the St James's Forum, although I should probably make you aware that a lot of them have been in touch with me and I've had extensive conversations with people relating to it. It won't change what the council are able to do to assist, unfortunately. I'm happy to listen and I definitely sympathise, and it's horrible. And I've seen people who truly look exhausted because they've not slept for weeks. I'm not in any way downplaying the impact that it's having on the residents of St James, but that doesn't change what the council are able to physically do. And I think there is an issue here with the police, who I also believe are trying their best, and the university, where power lays in a different area, and is, no matter how much we might like the council to take responsibility and solve the problem, we don't have the power to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Again, I will open it up to members of the committee. Not seeing anyone indicating. Okay, right, we'll move on to question 6, and that is from Councillor Michael Mitchell. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. To what extent has the current crisis impacted since March 2020 upon the level of business rate income received by the council, and what number of businesses are still making business rate payments?
Councillor Morse.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. I've really helpfully got a table in front of me, which is a bit difficult to articulate to you. So I will roughly read out some figures, but we'll make sure we get you a copy of the table. I'm sure Bindu Arjun will be able to sort. I'm sure you get a written copy anyway, but just make sure you do get them. So in 2019, the debt collectible was 83,087. No, I've tried too many numbers. Basically, the amount is down significantly by, and I'll read out the answer that goes with it, and we'll get you the table, because I'm going to read the wrong number. It's like a telephone number, and it will go horribly wrong. The net I'll be one of those famous politicians who can't read numbers. I will carry on. The net collectible debit has been halved for this year due to the introduction of COVID-19 nursery discount to a value of £312,202, and COVID-19 expanded retail, leisure and hospitality discount to a value of £41,875,445. This puts us in a more favourable position because the cost of the two reliefs are met in full by the government, and we also now have far less to collect in year. The percentage collection is down by 1% in comparison to the same time last year, but this will be due to A, not having taken recovery action under anybody this year, and to assist businesses when requested, we've deferred payment dates for up to 3 months. Therefore, those businesses will not start making payments until July. There are 5,030 properties rated for business rates, of which 2,843 receive 100% relief, so they have nothing to pay. That leaves 2,187 businesses with business rates to pay. However, some of those businesses will have less to pay than others through getting some sort of form of relief. For example, there are 230 businesses getting 80% mandatory charitable relief, meaning that they only have 20% to pay. We will definitely get you a written answer to that, because I'm not sure it made sense while I was reading it, to be honest. I hope you get it. And Bindu's got her hand up. She can probably give a better, more thorough, less number related answer.
Bindu.
No, that's okay, Councillor Morse. I was going to say you did better than you gave yourself credit for there, because absolutely, as you said, all the figures in the table show, and of course we're happy to circulate those to members, is that the amount that we're actually able to collect in the current year is half what we would have been expected to be able to collect in the previous year. So in April 2019, the amount that we could possibly collect was around 83 million, and this year it's around 41 million, very much for the reasons that you said, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Bindu. Councillor Mitchell, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. This one hopefully doesn't involve any numbers at all. The council owns an extensive portfolio of commercial property within the city. Are the council considering drafting a specific recovery plan to assist its commercial tenants?
This is one of those difficult situations where something spans across portfolios, and I genuinely don't have an answer for that, because I deal with the collection and the paying of business rate grants, but I don't necessarily deal with the business side of things. So I will get you a written reply to that if someone, I'm sure Howard has drafted it down somewhere, and he'll look into that for you, okay?
It is a slightly different question, but I'm sure we'll get that response to you, Councillor Mitchell. Happy to bring in members of the committee at this stage. Anybody indicating? Scrolling through my list.
Sorry, Councillor Bialik has just said that we are talking to other businesses about this. We have got a recovery plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, in the absence of any other questions, we will we'll move on to the questions from the non-committee members at this point, of which there are 3. First of all, Councillor Jemima Moore, question 1. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. After the Everyone In policy in March, when we saw the housing of people sleeping rough, were there instances of people presenting as homeless but not meeting the requirements of this policy?
Councillor Morse.
Thank you. No, all persons the service had a reason to believe were homeless, i.e. they had no available accommodation, including following any caseworker mediation attempts, were offered accommodation. And it says, and you've said in particular with your questions.
Yes, sorry.
You want me to give answers? I'll read the bit and then it might make sense.
Thank you, thank you.
How many people presented as homeless after the initial Everyone In period, and were they housed? A total of 376 households have presented to the service since the 24th of March, including those known rough sleepers at the time. Of those, 334 had either a relief or prevention duty accepted. The remaining were advice and assistance cases only, and all persons who were owed housing duty were offered housing. Only one rough sleeper declined accommodation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Moore, you have a couple of additional questions as part of that question. Over to you.
That question that I've not read. Do you want me to carry on with that one?
Questions B and C. Would you prefer to do it that way, Councillor Moore? Would you?
Yes, if you're happy to just do the B and C as well, that'd be great. Thank you.
Lovely.
You want me to read them?
Well, it's up to you. Do you want to read it?
So in particular, so you've answered the first one. The second one was, how many people who presented as homeless during the period of lockdown from March to date, or to whenever it was that you read it, did the council not offer support to because the council identified that they had no statutory duty or no recourse to public funds? And what alternative services were offered to these people?
Of 11 persons with no evident recourse to public funds, 7 persons were not accommodated due to either not being habitually resident in the UK or failing to exercise their treaty rights, which means they're not meaningfully seeking employment. Referrals to embassies, the Home Office, Devon County Council in cases of suspected social care need, and offers to repatriate were made in all cases. 4 persons were accommodated under a discretionary duty, 2 of whom have moved on. 2 remain in Exeter City accommodation.
We may have got 1 or 2 people who haven't muted their microphones. Just a reminder to everybody, if you can keep yourself on mute while you're not speaking, thank you. Or perhaps we can mute them if they're struggling to do it. Councillor Moore, your question, part C of your question.
Thank you, Chair. How many people presented as homeless as a result of domestic violence, and what safe accommodation or support was offered?
Councillor Moore.
35 households presented since March 24th with domestic abuse listed as the reason for loss of settled home. 22 were accommodated in council temporary accommodation with support from the accommodation provider, and either or both sanctuary floating support staff or splits the commissioned domestic violence support service. The remaining 13 were either supported into alternative accommodation with friends or family, or supported to return home with safeguarding provision and other support put in place.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Do you have a supplementary?
Just to say that I'm pleased to hear that discretion was given to those people who actually didn't fit the requirements of the policy. I think it's really important, particularly at this crazy time, that no one falls through the net. And I wonder if going forward we can have something written into policy if it happens that there's another lockdown or something in the future. I don't know what other strange things the future may hold for us, so that we can be sure that actually nobody will fall through the net and that we can make sure that everybody is housed.
I'm happy that my staff make the discretionary actions when they need to. What I am concerned about is if we put something into policy is how we end up when we spend, as we have currently, a lot more money than the government are willing to return to us. So I have to be realistic about the budgets that I have. But given that our staff have behaved in the way they have now, and we very much, we have quite an open door practice in situations like this, I imagine that we will carry that on. But whether we write it into firm hard policy, I'm not sure. I think Bindu Arjun has something to say as well as the...
Bindu, do you want to come in?
If I may, Chair. So Councillor Morse has already addressed the issue of local policy and officers using discretion where they're able to do so. For the type of changes you're suggesting, Councillor, we'd be looking at legislative changes at national level. So although we obviously work with a certain local policy, much of that is steeped in national legislation. So it would also require some changes at national level if we were to adopt what I believe you're suggesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, happy to open it up now to other committee members. If you'd like to indicate if you'd like to ask a follow-up. Okay, nothing coming through, nobody indicating. Okay, we will speed on to question 2, which is also from Councillor Jemima Moore. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Morse has confirmed that when people were moved into hotels, they were not made aware that there would be any service charge made to them. What will happen if, having been unaware that they needed to budget for it, homeless people are unable to pay the charge of £21 a week? Will it be accrued as debt?
Councillor Morse.
Service charge arrears are recorded but are not being taken into account for move-on eligibility purposes, i.e. will not act as a barrier to move on where an option can be found, and will also be written off in terms of debt recovery. Service charges are a debt to the council and are recoverable. Anyone struggling financially can be assisted through the extra wellbeing support.
Thank you. Councillor Moore, do you have a supplementary?
I think that if there was any way that our council or indeed the hotel, which was paid a large sum of money for the people staying there, the homeless people staying there, were able to write off this debt, it would be morally the right thing to do. I feel that they were the most vulnerable people in society at an extremely vulnerable time, and we saw a hotel still profiting by, and I know that officers would have worked really hard to try and find a really good deal at that time, but actually that hotel was paid a huge amount of money. It seems to me morally wrong, that they're being charged £21 a week, as well as the amount that, as a council, we were paying to the hotel. I don't know if there's any way we can go back to the hotel or anything that can be done to stop them from having that debt. It seems like the wrong thing, and particularly in that I know that if those people had been told at the beginning, it might be that they were able to budget and save that money and make sure they had it. But if somebody doesn't know, and then after a number of weeks is told, okay, now you need to pay this much, actually that's not very nice and can be quite stressful. And it's not nice to get into debt. Nobody wants to get into debt. We want to try and manage our funds. And so it seems like an unfair situation.
I'm going to
then I've got Bindu as well.
Yeah, let Bindu come in with a reply, and then I might say something afterwards.
Okay, Bindu.
Thank you, Chair. So just a bit of information that might just be helpful, Councillor Moore. So at the point where we were desperately trying to seek accommodation after the government announced the Everyone In initiative, and I know you already know this, but officers managed to, within 48 hours, secure accommodation to be able to be in a position to offer that to everyone who was willing to come in. we did not at that point identify the issue to people coming into our emergency temporary accommodation around the service charge. So we didn't do that. So when we eventually started to discuss with the residents of emergency accommodation about the service charge, we did it in a staged way. So we first of all explained what it was and when it would be due to be paid. We didn't backdate it to the point that they came into the accommodation. We obviously only put that requirement on going forward. So it's to pay for those things that we can't recover through housing benefit. So it's for non-recoverable costs. The other thing to bear in mind is that particularly in our major unit of temporary accommodation that we're using, all residents have access to 3 meals a day. So we are providing that kind of support, which means obviously they don't have to use income in sourcing food from elsewhere. One of the significant explanations in introducing the service charge is that it brings it into line with other temporary accommodation that the council has. So it would be unfair, I suggest, if some people in temporary accommodation were being charged and some people weren't being charged. What Councillor Morse has already explained is that we do, as we always will, with anyone who approaches the council with financial hardship, we will go through with them an understanding of their income and outgoing, and then work with them to something that is repayable. And if they cannot pay that service charge, then we would be referring them to the Exeter Wellbeing Fund that Councillor Morse has referred to. But if they do, despite all efforts, manage to accrue a debt, that won't be taken into account when we're looking to work with them on move-on accommodation. So they won't suffer a detriment, if you like. But as I said, it's absolutely in line with what we offer across all of our temporary accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morse. Do you want to come back in?
The one thing I did want to say is that I think that perhaps the hotel that we've been housing people in maybe got a little rough end of the stick than from Councillor Moore, and I don't think that's entirely fair, because it's not an easy sell to convince people that they want to house people who are rough sleeping in their business from which they make money. So I think they were, that whilst they could see a way that they may be able to get some money during what is a crisis, they also have been very open-minded with us and very supportive. And I you know, no relationship is ideal or wonderful, and it is a business transaction, but I do think that some credit needs to be given to them for willing and offering their services, because it's not the only place people have been housed. People came to us and offered accommodation, and we, you know, I am grateful that that was there, because I don't think some of the larger chains would have been quite as accepting.
Thank you. I'm bringing other members of the committee in now if they would like to ask follow-up or clarification questions.
I would like to say just something and support Councillor Morse and what she's just said. We've got to be very careful if by knocking people that is offering to take our homeless, and that would be the worst thing you could do, because the hotels don't need to take them. They might be short of money, but to be kicked on a comment like that is very poor in my view.
Okay, I'll take that as a comment, I think. Anybody else like to ask a point of clarification or follow-up question?
Yeah, Councillor Sparks.
Councillor Sparks.
Hi there, yeah. So I just wanted to clarify. So effectively, the service charge is a charge levied to recoup costs. However, ultimately, you know, the council does it as an accounting thing, and then ultimately the council can write that charge off. Have I understood that correctly?
As a local council, we can write off any charge that comes. Do you know that any debt could be written off by us? To be fair, it's not an easy thing to do. As someone who signs off any write-offs, a lot of work has to be done, and it's not just me. It would be me, and then Bindu would have to sign it, and someone from finance, and I think sometimes we have to get the legal to approve it. But there is always the ability in extreme situations for us to write off debts where people there is no chance of getting the money. So we don't do it often, and we do it in exceptional circumstances. But we're not heartless. We're not a machine, and we're not a business. So we can write it off, but ideally it is also part of a learning to manage your money kind of experience for people. So I think that has to be part of the work that we do with support workers as well. So I'd go back to what Bindu said earlier. They were being fed, they were being housed, you know, there was a lot of stuff we were paying for as a local authority. So the benefits that they were receiving to help pay for those things were there, and we haven't backdated it so that they were to where they wouldn't have been aware they were accruing a debt, because that just wouldn't have been fair.
Thank you. Councillor Foggin had a question.
Yeah. I know sometimes the type of patients that people that actually go in went down to that particular hotel, and I know the behaviour sometimes can be chaotic. My concerns really was about the way places will be left and whose responsibility will that be. I mean, I know it's a broad thing to say, and perhaps I shouldn't be saying it, but nevertheless, this is a thing that I'm wondering.
I'm going to let Bindu answer the question. I think I know the answer, but I'm sure she's going to give a far more technical one that will be more helpful for you.
Bindu.
Thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Foggin, when we entered into the agreement with the owner of the temporary accommodation, we agreed with them what would happen at the point where the people who were occupying the hotel moved out. So there are some things that the council has undertaken to put right, and then there are things which are the responsibility of the owner to put right. But all of that has been reflected in the amount that we have agreed with the owner for us to be able to use the accommodation. So it's very clear who's responsible for what at the offset. If I may, Chair, take the liberty of just addressing a point that Councillor Sparks made. Councillor Morse is absolutely right about our approach to write-off. So one of the things I just wanted to make clear is the council has a debt recovery policy. So there's a very clear and transparent process as to how we look to recoup funds owed to the council. So there's certain activity and action that we will try to do everything we can to obviously get the money back. But if it gets to a point where we have tried all reasonable means, and it would be, if you like, inappropriate to carry on pursuing that, that's the point at which officers will seek authorization from the portfolio holder and other senior officers for write-off. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further questions or clarification? See anybody else indicating? Okay, right, we'll move on. Question 3 comes from Councillor Diana Moore. Councillor Moore.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about the junction, and I'd like to know about what long-term changes will be made to the junction to ensure that proper social distancing can be maintained. What provision there will be for people needing to self-isolate because of suspected or actual cases of COVID-19, and how many people the junction will be able to accommodate after these changes have been made. Thank you.
Councillor Morse, sorry.
We're still working on options for remodelling the service and preferably to, I'm in the right place, yeah, preferably to deliver it at more than one location. This would ideally develop the service into a dispersed model whereby specific needs such as gender-specific accommodation need could be better addressed. However, this will be dependent on available resource, i.e. properties for repurposing, leasing or remodelling of support services. We are working with the provider BCHA, assessing current letting opportunities in the private rented and estates market, and also assessing options for installing self-contained pod accommodation within the junction premises. We are targeting an increase of 13 spaces as soon as possible and increasing it to 26 plus by the 1st of October. Provision for suspected COVID cases is relatively well established in that priority testing is being implemented by Public Health Devon at the outset by notification of sector staff. The clock tower surgery has also been supporting the reporting of cases as well as providing emergency testing. To date, there have been approximately 24 suspected cases across emergency and supported housing over the last 13 weeks, and none have resulted in positive tests. Self-isolation for suspected and actual cases is predominantly achievable across the majority of emergency and temporary accommodation, and with the exception of a few rooms in various locations that have shared bathroom or cooking facilities. The latter has been successfully addressed to date by delivery of food provisions. In the absence of an ensuite toilet and bathroom facilities in a few of accommodations, communal management processes have been implemented involving cleaning stations, individual towels, regular disinfectant cleaning, and clear protocols for residents and staff. In cases where residents are non-compliant with social distancing and related hygiene measures, a series of warnings and behaviour modification agreements are used. There is an outbreak management plan in place across all homelessness accommodation, rough sleeping settings, which Public Health Devon is leading on.
Thank you. Councillor Moore, do you have a supplementary?
Thank you, Councillor Morse, for that detailed reply. I just want to pick up on something that was mentioned earlier about the additional funding that's going to be coming. So when does the accommodation at the Great Western Hotel, the temporary arrangements end? And when does that kick in before people can move into the junction or these alternatives? So when will, will there be a gap? So thank you.
Councillor Morse.
He's waving at me, but I think we both know the answer. I'll start and she can come in if it goes horribly wrong. As far as I'm aware, we have enough funding from within service to pay for the accommodation till the end of August. We're hoping the government will have come forward with some option before then. And if we haven't, we will need to look at our own budgets to see if we're able to manage a longer stay. But I think it's really important that it's recognised, and you will see this in the budget documents going forward. There have been significant extra costs put on local authorities as a result of COVID-19, which the government have promised to pay for, which there is no evidence that they have met anywhere near the amount we have been spending as a local authority. And I think if Exeter are feeling it, I hate to think what some of the two-tier and second-tier local authorities, what some of their debt must look like, but it's a significant amount of money, and we are currently working with our budget and hoping that the government will come in and help us with this.
Bindu?
I think Councillor Morse has covered it off, Chair. So just to make clear that in terms of our existing emergency provision, we have funding that we have had to find within service. So members need to be clear that this is obviously having an impact potentially if this goes on longer term for other parts of the service. But we have found enough funding in service to fund that accommodation until the end of August. Our hope, as Councillor Moore said, is that the funding that's been promised by government is introduced before that point, so we can absolutely make sure that there is a smooth, if you like, transition out of that emergency temporary accommodation to other provision. But members do need to be aware that we have plans, so each individual who is currently accommodated under in our temporary emergency accommodation, we have a move-on plan for them that we've worked, as I think you've heard before, with our officers, with the police, with the other various support services, and particularly with our voluntary and community sector partner. The issue, of course, is accommodation. So we need to continue to look at options in the private sector, continue to think creatively about what accommodation might be available locally that's not currently being used, that we might be able to temporarily lease in order to continue our provision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bindi. Right, I'll open this question up to other members of the committee. Anybody else want to come in for a point of clarification or follow-up question? Not seeing anything. Okay.
Sure, again.
Sorry, I don't see everyone on my screen. So yeah, so Councillor Kevin Mitchell, was that?
Okay, Councillor Kevin Mitchell.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Chair. May I place on record my thanks to all the officers within your remit, because I think we should do that, and also thank you for answering the questions this evening in quite a lot of detail, all promising to get the answers that we want if you didn't have the detail, and also for your work as a portfolio holder, because I have to say people don't always recognise the work of portfolio holders. I've been there, so I know exactly what it's like. So as a roundup question, if I may, what do you think has gone well during this period of time, and what lessons have we learned to improve things in the future?
It's a very broad question. I will allow it on this occasion. It's supposed to be clarification really or follow on, but we'll allow it. Councillor Morse.
I think as a local authority, we have done everything that was asked of us, and to a degree that has been in my opinion, one, you know, best case exemplar of what could be done. And I, as a portfolio holder, and this is where I get to do the gushing thing, have had constant phone calls and updates and meetings and emails from my director, which is Bindu Arjun, on this. She just, if something passed her by and she suddenly thought, oh, the portfolio holder might need to know about that, she'd sort of ring very apologetically on a Friday afternoon and kind of say, you know, we're doing this, and is that okay? Or can I just vent some ideas because this is what we're thinking, and how do you think that plays politically? So I think we've done a brilliant job, and I don't think there's anything that I think we would have done differently unless government guidance had been different, if that makes sense. You know, we've reacted to what's thrown at us. It was a conversation, it was a question I was asked earlier, you know, do you think it's appropriate that an announcement is made but no guidance is issued? Well, that's what we've been doing all the way along, really. So I think we've done very well at trying to shape something that we've started without the guidance, but when the guidance arrived, we've had, in credit to them, all of the people that we have, HCLG, our connections have been very helpful during this. It's not to say that there have probably been a few conversations where words were a little sharper than normal, but I think that's healthy in a situation like this, that you're able to have those honest conversations with each other. So I would say across my portfolio, the one area that I wish that we'd been able to do things quicker, and that's not that I think we could have done it quicker, but I just wish we could have been, was with some of the business support grants. But in order to get those in place in a way that was genuine and safe, and that didn't lead to fraud, and made sure the right people who were supposed to get them got them, we had to take the time to write them properly. So that is no disservice to anyone who did the work, because like I said, they worked ridiculous hours and they really put in a massive effort for us. So I just wish we'd have been able to do it quicker, but that's not because I think we could have. And I think one of the things that sometimes is going a little unnoticed here, and it's because it sort of sits between two portfolios, but the staff that work in the customer service centre weren't all suddenly furloughed and didn't all disappear somewhere else, although some of them may have been, but they didn't disappear and stop working. They moved across to the welfare support, and they have been doing wonderful things, ensuring that people across the city have been receiving medication or the food they needed, or just a telephone call, by linking them up with some of the charities and stuff. So for the staff from the customer service centre, I think Bindu and I have been very grateful in many emails, but I think they also should get another shout out, because I think staff across the council, not just in my area, have really risen to a challenge here and done some amazing stuff. But I don't think I could change anything in this exceptional circumstance. I'm sure we will do a wash up at the end of all of this, and we will sit down and look at the emergency planning and things like that. But I'm really quite proud at the moment, and maybe with time I might have a slightly more objective view of it. But I do think we have responded very well to this, and it goes back to, you know, bringing everybody in, continuing the services we give, getting business grants handed out. It's been a very good area. And back to environmental health, who really aren't getting the shout out that they need on this, although thankfully you did sort of shine a light on them this time. The private rental sector team have been just getting on with their job and doing all the things they could do at their desk, so that they can get out there when they can get in the field and start doing the rest of those HMO checks when it is safe to do so. So I think that's what I take from this. Ask me in 6 months and we might be in a different situation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moss. I think that was the right thing to do, to take that question and hear that answer. And I think Kevin's genuine and generous comments we should all echo. And I'd certainly like to second our thanks to the supporting people, portfolio holder, to Councillor Morse, to Bindu and all their teams. And I think hopefully we can minute our thanks, Howard, and Bindu, if you wouldn't mind passing on the thanks of our committee to all of your staff in the supporting people area, that would be appreciated. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Morse. We're going to move on to our next set of questions, which are for Councillor Laura Wright. Questions to portfolio holder for Council Housing Development and Services. I'm going to ask Councillor Wright to briefly present the note, which you will have all received, relevant to her portfolio, and hopefully everyone has had the opportunity to read. Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, hopefully you have all read it. You'll be relieved to say I'm not going to read it word for word, because it is quite a fairly detailed view of the asset management and tenant support work that's been undertaken by the council housing team since lockdown in March. You'll see from the report that officers and staff members continued with emergency works and undertook extra tenant support tasks to address the welfare and the safety of our council tenants. And this was managed during the challenge of moving all appropriate staff to be working from home where possible, while keeping key essential services running at the same time. So to echo the thanks that's just come from Councillor Morse, I would like to commend the Director responsible for housing, Bindu Arjun, and the service leads and all the staff for their commitment and hard work at this time. They really, really have been incredible. So you've got the report. I know there are some questions. Chair, if it's okay, I would just like to just highlight a couple of things in the report for particular note, if that's all right.
Please do, yes, Councillor Wright.
Thank you. So one of them is the development work. As you can see from there, we are continuing with our development work and bringing forward the opportunities to meet the target of 500 new homes for the HRA. That may answer a question that I think Councillor Diana Moore brought up earlier on about the development plans. Sorry, it was Councillor Henson. So yes, this work is continuing. It's budgeted for within the HRA. There's no strain on the general fund budget for this to be happening. There's a couple of updates in the development work section. So it says the Langs development site was due to remobilise at the beginning of July. They're actually on site now. So those are the houses in the Carrick estate in the St Thomas area, which will bring forward some more new houses in that area, as well as the new developments that we're looking at. And the extra care scheme, we've had a date of approximately March, springtime 2021. So everything is coming on board with that. So I'll move to questions now, if that's what you want, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wright. And just for anybody watching from the public who won't necessarily know, HRA is an acronym. That is the Housing Revenue Account, essentially our council housing and tenants. So let's take question 1, which comes from Councillor Diana Moore. Councillor Moore.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wright. What assessment of previous circumstances will be undertaken to better understand their needs now and enable them to manage their financial circumstances where COVID-19 has resulted in financial difficulties?
Councillor Wright.
Sorry, Chair, I'm getting a bit of background noise. I'm not sure if it's coming from...
Yeah, it seems to have gone on for me now, but are you still getting it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I've just realised I had Radio Devon still playing in the background.
We'll give you a moment to turn that off. And come back.
I thought somebody was on the phone, but I thought, well, they're being very informative. Terribly sorry, that was a bit of a glitch in IT. Yes, in the homelessness settings, we've been proactively reviewing the needs assessments of all those persons in emergency COVID accommodation, as Councillor Morse has already said. And this includes reviewing the financial circumstances, their income and debt management, and involves referrals for specialist support from Homemaker Devon under subcontract from Citizens Advice Bureau for those who need support to maximise income and to maximise debt. From a housing management perspective, housing officers in tenancy services carry out regular tenancy property inspections of all tenants in normal circumstances. So during lockdown, these have been restricted to what we call desktop reviews during the pandemic. But as the restrictions are reduced, we are starting to work towards returning to visiting the tenants in their homes. I know that a lot of communication has taken place with the tenants by phone, and they've also had a system if they were due for an inspection of their home, they were able to do that by sending in photographs, and I think possibly some live streaming at some point as well. So the inspections have also been given a RAG rating depending on the level of support that a tenant might need. and their ability to sustain their tenancy. So that again includes financial difficulties, level of debt, perhaps owed to the council. So working with the payment and collection and benefits team, the housing officers are now prioritising contacts to those tenants who may be falling into rent arrears. And the officers are assessing the financial difficulties that they may have, and either referring them for offering them direct support or liaising with officers with specialist knowledge in either debt collection or benefit entitlements. From collections perspective, formal recovery action is currently suspended, as you know, I think. And the payment and collection staff are contacting tenants to discuss their rent position and also council tax and or housing benefit overpayment where applicable. So this may lead to helping them to make a claim for benefits or signposting them to other agencies for assistance, agreeing realistic and affordable arrangements, or deferring payment while they wait for universal credit, for instance. So I know at the beginning of the lockdown period, when some people did lose their jobs and weren't able to come under the furlough system, etc., and were trying to apply for universal credit, there was obviously a gap of quite a few weeks, I think, where nothing was coming in. So particularly at that time, I know the support that was offered to tenants was incredible and very, very sensitive as well from our officers. And that personal contact that they had allows staff to draw on discretionary funds if needed, including the extra wellbeing support fund, which Councillor Morse previously mentioned. And I know, along with Councillor Oliver, how important that's been and how really useful that fund had been right at the beginning, particularly because we were involved in assessing grants and applications for it. So generally, as a council, we really have supported and helped people as much as we were able. And many customers have been complimentary about that personal touch. On the 9th of June, 11 staff made 1,200 outbound calls to customers with council tax to pay. That was including council tenants, but who had no entitlement to council tax support and had no arrears for previous years. And this did bring in over £10,000 in payments for the council, but it also assisted customers from falling into arrears by reprofiling payments or drawing down help from discretionary funds. So I think it's important as well to point out here that much as we obviously would want to help everybody as much as we possibly can, we do also have to be very careful of our own budgets, which are under a huge amount of strain at the moment, as we all know. So I've been very pleased to see how this has worked and how good and experienced the staff are at being able to assess sort of real need and the level of need across the board, and to be able to address that appropriately, whether it means to help with discretionary funds or to help with debt management, which sometimes just being able to write off a debt isn't the only way. So sometimes being able to manage debt is equally helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Moore?
Thank you very much for that detailed reply. That's really helpful, and again shows the fantastic work the staff have been doing. I'm quite concerned about, as we move forward and the national support is stepped down both practically and financially for people, that actually we prepare for various cliff edges that people might face. And one of those will be the lifting of the evictions. And so I just wanted some reassurance from the portfolio holder that the council won't be evicting people as a result of council tax arrears or rent arrears as a result of this this crisis, and then get into financial difficulties, and how long that policy can stay in place.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. And Bindi, you may want to come in. Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure Bindi will come in and correct any wrong things that I might say here. But my initial response to that, Councillor Moore, is I hope you have heard enough and know enough already about the way that our staff and our teams work with people, and as an executive, what our priorities are. which is to support people and never. It would be cutting our nose off to spite our face if we evicted council tenants. Without that being the absolute last place to go to. And whenever it is, there are usually many other complex reasons around something, not just non-payment of rent or not non-payment of debt. There will be other complex issues around there. So that's never a place that we want to go to. So we certainly wouldn't just wait for a lift of evictions to happen and then make people homeless, because as we know, that doesn't end the problem for people, or for us. It's much better to support people as far and as long as we can. I hope that answered the question, but I'm sure Bindu would like to come in with some factual stuff there.
Please do, Bindu, if you'd like to.
Thank you, Chair. So Councillor Wright is absolutely right, of course, in terms of the approach that council officers will take with working with tenants. So in effect, we'll go back to working the way that we normally do. We have very clear processes when tenants or anyone falls into debt, how we'll work to support them out of that situation. However, I will say, and you've already heard quite a lot said, and you'll hear a lot more at the briefing next week about the council's financial position. And if I can just focus specifically on our council housing, obviously the money that we get from tenants in our council housing goes back into paying for the maintenance of that house, of housing, for paying staff, etc. So whilst we absolutely work as hard as we can, and of course, as already been said, it doesn't make sense for us to, if you like, go to eviction as a kind of first choice. Not that we would, because those people will simply represent to the council as homeless, albeit they will present possibly with a decision around intentional homelessness if they haven't paid, or if they're in arrears. So we do have a policy that we follow. We do, wherever possible, try to work in as thoughtful a way as we can with our tenants and our residents generally who find themselves in financial difficulty. But ultimately, we do try to recover where we can, because that's important to keep the service going. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Bindu. We'll bring in other members of the committee if anybody has points of clarification or questions that follow up what you've just heard. Councillor Oliver.
Is it not the case that for anybody who had lost their income and was claiming universal credit, that eventually, and I realise there might be a time lag, but eventually the amount of housing benefit they received would be equal to the amount of council house rent they had to pay? So with patience, the money would come in to fund their arrears. I know in the private sector, often the levels of rent are way above housing benefits, and then you get a situation where people have to use the money and eat or pay rent. But with council housing, I would assume that the social housing element, housing benefit, would cover that. Is that right?
I can bring Bindu back in here.
Yes, I think Bindu was.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Chair. So Councillor Oliver is right that to some extent the funds that might be available to an individual from universal credit, when that finally does come through, would meet the cost of housing. In some cases, of course, there may be a top-up that's payable. And so, as well as the housing benefit, people would be expected, obviously based on their circumstances, to be able to be making a contribution. But in the main, you're right, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright, did you want to come back on that at all?
No, I don't think so. I think Bindu's covered that. Thank you.
Covered. Okay. Anybody else for a follow-up? Or
a question, Chair. Councillor Henson.
Councillor Henson.
On your housing health and safety complex, where the gas boilers are installed and we've inspected and it's raised its head in the last couple of weeks, for me anyway, it has been condemned. What's the length of time does that new boiler have to go into one of our council estates, council properties. Is there a length of time? Councillor Wright.
Who would like to answer that? Councillor Wright.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite clear on the question, Councillor Henson.
Is the way one of the gas boilers in one of my areas has been condemned in the last couple of weeks, by which time they haven't heard again since it disappeared. Is there a time that our repairs office will go back in? Is there a length of time, or have the rest of them got to?
So if they're left without a boiler, that does need addressing, because that is very unusual practice for us, because that is counted as an emergency repair. Left without hot water. So if there's a problem there, could I ask please that you would email the details into the councillor's housing email, and I'm sure that will be addressed. I think Bindu wanted to.
Yeah, Bindu.
Sorry, Chair.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
I think Bindu's going to come in as well, Councillor Henson.
Thank you, Chair, but I think Councillor Wright has addressed it. That would absolutely be classed as an emergency, and what we have been doing, obviously, we stood down most of our services during the COVID period in line with government guidance, but certainly we are responding to emergencies. So if we were made aware of that, we would absolutely be in dialogue with the tenant. But as Councillor Wright has said, if Councillor Henson is aware that isn't the issue, or in any case, if she wanted to get further clarification, please do contact us with the details and we'll certainly look into it. Thank you, Chair.
I'll do that tomorrow morning, Bindu. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else on this question, please, before we move on to the final one?
Councillor Sparks, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Sparks.
Hi there. I'm not sure you have the figures to hand. However, you mentioned roughly 1,200 people being telephoned to recover some money. Obviously, we are in unprecedented times. I was just wondering how, what's the council situation at the moment in terms of how much money are we actually owed, and is it coming in slowly?
Well, that's a bigger question. I'm not sure we'll have an answer to that now, other than what David Hodgson's already put out. Bindu, do you want to comment at all?
I was just going to say, Chair, that those figures in terms of where the council hasn't been able to collect funds due to it through council tax, business rates, housing benefit overpayments.
Okay.
You, Chair.
I think this is something we will come back to quite possibly at the next customer focus scrutiny. I haven't got anybody else. Mark, do you have anybody else?
Yeah, can I just say something?
Yes, please do.
On tenancy services and estates, I'd just like to make a comment about we have launched a lockdown garden competition. Well, I think this is very positive, in this very difficult times. And it takes me back to 1998 when I first became a councillor, when Exeter actually did have competitions. And my first job was to go out with Chester Long to judge the gardens at Newport Caravan Park. And it was very much a pride thing in Exeter. And I just would like to congratulate the officers and Laura for launching this garden competition. I think it's very important to engage people in very positive things at a very difficult time.
Thank you, Councillor Foggin. That's a positive comment, I think, to end that question on. I think that clattering we were hearing in the background stopped, so I won't push that point further. Question 2, which is our final question for this evening, comes also from Councillor Diana Moore. Councillor Moore.
Thank you. As a consequence of this phase of the COVID pandemic, how will the council team review its emergency plan for each council service? And just as in brackets, I'm quite worried about what happens if there's a second wave.
Councillor Wright.
Thank you. To your little bit in brackets, yes, we all are. I think nobody would disagree with that, Councillor Moore. So the business continuancy plans contingency and continuancy, they were in place. So the council already had plans in place for an eventuality. I don't think any of us could have actually foreseen this eventuality a couple of years ago. But as soon as information started coming to light, I am very pleased to say I think the council is quite a few steps ahead of perhaps other people in office further on up the road in London. And I know that our officers and senior management boards were working incredibly hard many weeks before we actually got to a point of lockdown to be able to really put clear things in place with how their services were going to operate on different levels, depending on the level of how bad the COVID was going to be, whether we would have a full lockdown or what. So that was obviously very difficult to do because they were trying to sort of see into the future, but they did extensive work. So when it did get to a lockdown, that's why everything was able to move really quickly. And also the work that had been done since last year on being able to do remote working for a lot of the staff members, and the IT provision that had been put into place and the plans that had been made to do that meant it was a really efficient sort of process, being able to switch everything very quickly into this emergency situation and to be up and running with it. The plans obviously are being reviewed and updated all the time as situations change. Sometimes when something's announced on the news, which I think has already been covered, that you'll have an announcement perhaps at 6 o'clock or 4:30 or 7:15, and you'll suddenly hear that something new is coming into place, whether it be funding coming into something or a review of lifting lockdown restrictions and what that might mean for environmental health or policing. And I think that everybody in SMB and their service leads underneath them have just been so efficient at being able to respond to things very quickly and working way over the hours that they would normally do to make sure that things are covered in all areas. Where it comes to the council housing area, that's no different. Obviously, I've got sight of those plans and we have regular updates, regular discussions when things are changing. For instance, at the beginning, when there was the problem of working out how we could comply with legislation to be able to do gas safety checks when we were in a lockdown and people didn't want anyone to come into their house, or many people didn't want to. And we also had to look at our own staff safety and assess the PPE that was needed to be able to source it, but to try and keep our residents and everybody in the city that's under our jurisdiction as safe as possible, as well as our staff. So I think all of the executive have been in close contact with their directors and are aware of the fast-moving pace sometimes of things changing and being updated and being reviewed. I'm sorry, I've gone off the answer that was prepared for me, so I hope I haven't missed anything out in there. But obviously, you're probably detecting that I'm very proud of the council and all of the staff for the way that they have managed all of this. So the Strategic Management Board, SMB, have been reviewing things regularly throughout the week, and now everything's being reviewed again in preparation now for the easing of lockdown. Maybe a key date to bear in mind will be the 4th of July. So we have to try and imagine what that will look like and what we have to put in place, and things moving on through the summer. So what the board has to do is to ensure that in the event of a disruptive incident, Exeter City Council responds promptly and efficiently with incident management, ensures that critical activities are resumed as quickly as possible and or continue to be delivered during a disruption, focuses initially on those activities that have been identified as a priority in our business impact analysis, implements contingency arrangements such as moving to a relocation site or identifying alternative working practices, i.e. suspending non-critical activities, is a key feature of this phase of the response. And eventually you'd hopefully be able to get to a place where you return to business as usual, which is called resumption and recovery. And there is an organisational-wide emergency plan which does cover pandemics, but as I've said, as much planning as you could possibly do, I don't think anyone could have foreseen this. So I think they've done an incredibly good job. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Moore, and I'm sorry if I waffled on quite a bit on that.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Obviously, this question encompasses the whole range of the Council's activities, not just Councillor Wright's portfolio. But if you do have a follow-up question, Councillor Moore, we'll see whether there'll be somebody who can answer it.
Thank you for your detailed reply. That was really helpful just to know about that. And I would like to add my thanks to the phenomenal work and commitment of the staff. Thank you. I don't have a follow-up question. Thank you, Councillor Moore. And again, I think at this point it's only right to repeat what we've said earlier about Councillor Moore's portfolio and to thank everybody, Councillor Wright and Bindu and the team in the Council Housing Development Services, and again to record our thanks in the minutes. And again, Bindu and Laura, if you wouldn't mind passing on our thanks to all of the staff from this committee. I'm happy to open this sort of broad question up to committee members if there are any follow-ups or questions of clarification. I think we're all good. I've checked all my sources there. Okay, lovely. Right. Well, that's just remains to again thank everybody who's attended this evening, both councillors of the committee and the councillors from outside the committee who are asking questions. Thank you. Good questions, good answers. I hope it's been helpful. Thank you to Bindu, to our two portfolio holders, and to Howard, Mark and Sharon for attending and making sure everything runs smoothly. The date of the next meeting is Thursday, the 16th of July, again at 5:30. It says here in the Civic Centre. You never know, but I suspect we might be looking at our screens again. So that, unless there is any other points of business or order, wait briefly, we will conclude the meeting there.